Hello. So, welcome to Experiential Futures. It's going to be a little bit a mix of a talk and a live visualization and experiment that we're going to do. But we would like to start off with just saying I always loved magic. And, oh, sorry, we actually don't have the speaker notes on here. I'm very sorry for that. What is this? Here? Nope. Sorry? Okay, yeah. Sorry about that, yes. Rookie mistake. Okay, so let's start again. I love magic, and I love the ability of it to amaze us with something we think it wasn't possible and we can't explain. And the combination of necessary skills, engagement, illusion, and entertainment that the magician performs. And so from the masters like escape artist Harry Houdini, who could escape from anything, even out of a milk can while being handcuffed, to the more technological magic of David Copperfield. And I was always very interested in how technology is being used in the technological contraptions that are being used in those tricks. And one of the good examples for this is the Mechanical Turk. I don't know how many of you know the history of the Mechanical Turk of Amazon, but essentially it was exhibited by its owners as a magic chess-playing automaton. And what was actually the case was that there was inside a small person who operated the levers. So for every magic trick, there's an explanation. And I feel like one of the key points of something feeling magical is that we don't understand how it is possible and that it's inexplicable. But once we understand it, it stops being magic. And so there's always been a very close connection between magic and technology. So from the early experiments of Nikola Tesla to Thomas Edison, who was considered the wizard of Menlo Park. And today as designers, we aim to transform technology into magic. And we show things to people that surprise and delight them with something they thought wasn't possible. And for me personally, in the last few years, some of those experiences I would consider magic was definitely the iPad painting project by the London-based consultancy Burke, where they did an application for an iPad where you could type in a text, and with time-lapse photography, it was recorded and seemed like the type was standing in space. Then, I think about a year ago, the app that Zach Lieberman did, the Landlines app, where basically you drew a random line and it finds a corresponding shape in satellite imagery. And one of the classics, for me personally, is the Pulse Room by Raphael Lozano Hammer, in that a heartbeat gets stored in a light bulb and lives on there forever. So I think we all sort of remember experiences with technology that felt magic. And for me personally, one of the things was the first time I talked on a mobile phone with my mom for the first time, and I was on a train, and I called my mom. I was like, oh my God, this is insane. This is magic. But it was also like Shazamming a song for the first time. It just felt really amazing, like just your song, I Shazam it. The first Spotify Discover Weekly playlist, I was very surprised by how accurate it was. And the iPhone Face ID that just magically unlocks my phone. And so I think one of the key points why these experiences feel magic is that they eliminate friction, and they just work how technology is supposed to work. So I listen to a song and I just want to know what it is, and technology tells me what it is, or it looks me in the face and knows who I am. So specifically with Spotify and Shazam, obviously, and with face recognition, data is one of the key points why these experiences work. And so what we would like to do now is to do our little interactive experiment. And keep in mind, it's an experiment. We did it a few times, but we hope everything goes okay. But let's try this.
Yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed. So now, actually, please take out your mobile phones. I know usually it's frowned upon to have your phones out during a talk, but now it's actually encouraged. And maybe you can zoom in a bit.
Yeah, I think it should be,
Yeah, and open up a web browser and go to this URL that you see up there. So the URL is bit.ly/FITCPol, all lowercase. Okay, a couple people made it already. And we're going to have this little experiment to find out more about the people in the audience here. I mean, the conference just started, and we want to learn about you guys, what you're doing, and you can also learn about each other, where people are coming from, and what you do, and things like that. So it's going to be fun. So far, it seems to be working.
Cool.
Okay, people are still logging in. You should see a little hi on your device if everything worked. And also, this experiment is completely guided, so you don't have to do anything. Just leave your web browser open, and we will guide you through a series of questions. I'm not actually sure how many people are in here, so I don't know when to stop. But 120 sounds reasonable. Yeah? Oh no, people are leaving again. Okay, let's just get started here. Okay, here they are. Okay, so first question, a very easy one. Where are you guys from? And I know there's not many options. We already knew that a lot of people would be from North America. So cool. Okay, we have about as many people from some other country than the US, and Canadians are, of course, in the majority.
So let's go to the second question. Since this is a pretty multidisciplinary conference, we were interested what kind of skill sets we have in the room today. So what do you do? Okay. Some people switching from CEO to student. It's interesting.
Cool. And of course, with these professions come also certain stereotypes, like you have architects or designers always wearing black turtlenecks. So an easy question, what color is your top that you're wearing right now? Or what is the favorite color on your top that you're wearing right now? That also works. Okay, oh, black and blue, the majority.
And the next one, speaking of appearances, I'm typically the tallest person in the room. And I always get very confused when I meet somebody who's actually taller than me. So I would like to know, is there anybody in the audience who's taller than me? So how tall are you, actually?
So far, so good.
Nobody, wow.
You win. Oh. Okay, find your rival. No.
And the next question, a little bit more personal. Yeah, let's ask, how old are you actually? Right.
Okay, cool. Usually you also associate certain life events with older age and sometimes even happiness. So the next question is, how happy are you with where you are in life at the moment? Oh, cool. Very happy crowd. We couldn't really mess that up, unfortunately. We'll try our best. We'll get there.
Okay, the next question is a bit of a random question, but since we are in Canada, we wanted to know, do you like Justin Bieber?
Oh, boo. Did that on purpose. Huge believers. Okay, and since we're asking about teenage crazes and things you might do when you're young or not, when was your first kiss?
Oh.
Okay. And, well, since with these things, interpersonal things, attractiveness also, or at least confidence, often plays a big role, how attractive do you think you are? Be honest, we can see you. Yes.
Okay. Now, look at the neighbor next to you. How attractive do you think they are?
No, we're not doing this. You can do that later. It's mean. Okay, actually what we're interested in, since we're talking about attractiveness, who are the Instagram superstars in here? How many likes do you get per Instagram picture that you post? Or what's your record? Okay, cool. Okay, so we actually have someone with more than 500 likes. Wow. Sweet. Did Jessica get back in here again? Okay, another question. Since talking about social media and also about the downsides of technology, which is kind of the topic of this talk, even though everyone's laughing, what kind of superpower would you like to have to survive the coming tech apocalypse? And this is now just a text field, so you can enter whatever you like and press submit. And then hopefully it should. Flying is good. Survival. That's smart.
Yeah.
Emoji. Why not?
Underwear. Wow.
It got taken out of context, I'm afraid.
Huh. Okay. And so the last question that we would like to ask you, since we now ask you about 10 slightly personal questions, how concerned are you actually about sharing your data with us today?
Right, cool, okay. So we'll see where this is going. So that you don't have to be too concerned. I'm not doing anything with the data. Promise. Okay, cool. Thanks so much for participating. Let's look a little bit more at the data that we've just collected here, learn a little bit more about ourselves. And one thing, please keep your phones open while we're doing this. So just leave the browser open and your phone's unlocked. So we've asked about the profession and got these answers here. And of course, you might be wondering, okay, are all of these designers from Germany, for example, or are they from somewhere else? So we can put the country where you're from on the y-axis to see that. And we see, okay, there's a ton of designers from everywhere. And we can also look at other things. For example, maybe there's a correlation between your profession and your age. So maybe you're, oops, sorry. That's better. Okay, so maybe you need to be a little bit older to be a CEO, for example. And are we seeing anything like this?
Oh, we have one pretty young CEO in the audience.
Yep, nice. Very good. And of course, to make it more obvious, we can also do color coding here to see the different ages that we've collected. And other things that we might be wondering about professions are certain professions more adventurous than others, for example. So when has their first kiss happened? And then we can look at this data in this way, so you can draw your own conclusions. And maybe, since some of you might be interested in a career change, it's also interesting how happy certain professions are. So we can look at that. And does anything really... Students are pretty happy, or so-so. Yeah. Okay, kind of a risky move. And then maybe happiness also comes with age. So we can look at that. Are people getting happier the older they are? It certainly looks like it. And another thing, one thing that we asked about is how concerned you were with sharing this data with us. So we can also have a look at that, obviously, and see if that correlates with age. Certain people are concerned. And it could also be a function of the country, for example. So in the EU, for example, we have relatively strict data laws, so maybe that plays a role. Okay, so people from somewhere else are concerned in general. All right, cool.
So, but one thing that we would like to do now is like, data can be obviously very descriptive. So we would like to look at like one subset of people that we have in this room today. So let's look a little bit closer at the Justin Bieber fans. So we see the answers were yes, no, hell yes. And so let's see like where the hell yes Justin Bieber fans are actually from. So we have about 6 from Canada, a few from the USA, and 3 from somewhere else. So let's look at how old they actually all are. So we have, yeah, they're a little bit on the younger side. And then let's look at how tall some of them are. Okay. And then I think it would be interesting to turn on the sweater color for the hell yes Justin Bieber fans. So, okay, blue sweaters, most of them. Just looking around. Huh. So, okay.
If you meet someone with a blue sweater, you know what's up.
Yeah.
Okay.
One red one. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, anyway, so for the last part, please, again, make sure that your phones aren't locked. Let's look at something else. Since we've collected all this data, it might be time to get a little more personal. And, for example, check out who all the Canadians in the room are. So if you could lift your phones up, you can see all of the Canadians in here, blinking merrily away.
Oh, please keep your phones up for like 2 minutes, thank you. So we have the Canadians.
It won't be long.
Yeah. Okay.
Oop, here's the Canadians again.
Yeah.
And maybe we're also interested in where people in general are from. So we can also have that, have a little color coding here. And now everybody should be blinking. And of course, again, we can look at certain subsets. Maybe we're interested in who the Canadian designers are. So let's do that. You can out yourself here. Yes. Sweet. Okay, and again, we can also do the full color coding for our professions and have the different professions blinking here. And maybe let's look at the Instagram superstars.
We had like 2, right?
Okay. And maybe the people who weren't concerned about their privacy. What happened to them? Okay. Sweet. Thank you so much. You can put down your phones again. Okay, so fortunately the experiment worked. Okay, thanks so much for participating. That was a lot of fun. And you've probably experienced how personal data raises a lot of questions, especially if it's your own personal data and not just some hypothetical user's data somewhere on the internet. Of course, that's a very important question that designers have to ask themselves. What will they be doing with this data? And I think experiments like these are great ways to learn that and actually have skin in the game for once. So in this very specific case, we didn't really ask anything serious. We purposefully kept it lighthearted. But you can ask yourself what would have happened if we had actually asked you meaner questions or questions that could actually damage you. And then, for example, point out people who are really attractive or unhappy in certain professions. So in this room, it was a bit of a special situation since we had this direct accountability that the two of us are up here and you could have easily formed a mob and stormed the stage. And so we were motivated to not piss you off too much. And of course, in this very situation, you could have also just walked out or ignored the whole thing, which is way more difficult with services like Spotify or Facebook that actually track what you're doing while using their service. But of course, we're very interested in exploring the potentials and also the potential issues of these types of technologies. And there's stories abound about what can go wrong with technology. So this example is almost a classic by now, where a father learned about his daughter's pregnancy by the coupons that were printed on the back of her receipts. And then you have mess-ups like this year, this racist soap dispenser that ignores dark skin because it was trained, or it just had the color sensor settings all off. And it gets even darker with this Google Images mishap, for example, where they apparently had a training data set that only contained white people. So it would recognize a man and his girlfriend as gorillas, which is just awful. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of these things that can happen with these algorithms that we're developing at the moment and all this data collection that is happening. And of course, there's been a lot of recent talk about these consequences, and you have all these sensationalist headlines, sometimes with Elon Musk, sometimes without, especially in the context of AI. And you kind of have these talking heads that are either promising the apocalypse or some blissful utopia that is happening through all this data and machine learning. So it's, of course, easy to paint some doomsday scenario picture, but maybe we need to be a little bit more discerning about that. Since one thing that we humans have always been doing when it came to technology was being super skeptical about it. So this is a caricature from 1907 when the mobile telegraph was invented, and the artist was afraid that people would no longer talk to each other but only look at their telegraphs. And fortunately, we avoided this terrible fate, but it's pretty much been always like that. So some new technology comes out, we don't really know what it's about, what it's going to do to us. Just think of the invention of writing, which was heavily criticized by Plato and Socrates for robbing us of the ability to remember things, and standardized time would enslave us to the rhythm of clocks, and so on and so forth. So there's always this period of adjustment that happens with every new technology where we, as a species and a society, figure out what to do with it. And since we're both from Germany, we're, of course, huge David Hasselhoff fans. And this is from the very first episode of Knight Rider. I don't know if anyone has seen that. So it's about this talking super magic car. And this is how Michael Knight encounters Kit for the first time.
All right. Might as well put on some music. All these weird gadgets, you'd think they'd give you a radio.
What would you like to hear?
What the hell was that?
Fantastic actor. Okay. Yeah, but he's quickly got used to that technology and made use of that, so that was fine. But of course, the question is, do today's emerging technologies require a different level of evaluation than those from the past? Or will they just work the same as technology has always worked for us? And it's really hard to say, so we're both not 100% sure, since there's a couple of things that are definitely different when it comes to today's technologies. Because obviously this combination of data and speed and algorithms creates a lot of complexity that is really hard to understand for us or even for other machines. So if you think to the Strava example, which was a couple of weeks back in the news, where you could find secret army bases by just looking at the data that this fitness app had collected from unsuspecting soldiers, it's one of those things, one of these outcomes that you wouldn't expect when you think about the technology itself, and which the soldiers obviously didn't expect when using this tool. But it's just one of the side effects that you can have. And you lose sight of this interconnectedness between systems, and everything is so immediately at scale that there is little time for a course correction. And then, of course, to help us with the complexity that's inherent in all of these technological systems, we create more technology to solve that. Kind of like we're dealing with climate change, where the solution to this technologically caused climate change is just more technology, obviously. And if you think about systems like self-driving cars, there's just a lot going on. It's easy to underestimate how hard it actually is to drive a car. And these machines have to make split-second decisions, and all of a sudden even philosophical problems like the trolley problem become important again. So if you need to cause an accident, who are you going to kill? And now, again, thinking back to all this interconnectedness, say the car had access to their Facebook profiles of all the potential victims. Should it kill the sad ones, or the happy ones, or the young mothers? So it's getting nasty. And unfortunately, all this complexity and this lack of understanding that we can have for it leads to technology becoming these mysterious entities that no one is really sure about how they work. And of course, that also makes it very hard to debug them and get the kinks out. And it's unlike the Mechanical Turk, where you could just open the box and see the little man inside. And when it comes to understanding the results of these systems, we have some very disturbing examples, like the prediction of the 2016 US election, where pretty much everyone was sure that Hillary would win, and then all of a sudden Donald Trump won. And the same with Cambridge Analytica, which again was in the news a couple of weeks back, where they were scraping Facebook profiles to manipulate or influence at least the election. It's really hard to say, and that is probably the thing, that it's just really hard to say. And even apart from these very prominent cases, we also have systems that work automatically that not everyone is sure how they actually work and how well, like the scoring systems that are used by some courts in the US judicial system that predict how likely a person is to be a repeat offender. And then judges will use this number that this machine came up with to actually declare a sentence and lock people up for maybe longer. So it's hard to say. And what's also interesting is if you look at the naming conventions of all these systems that we're having. So we usually have these female smart assistants, and then we have super powerful computers that have male names, like Watson. So there's all kinds of biases in here, and we have to be really careful that with the complexity of these systems, we're not ending up creating lots and lots of self-fulfilling prophecies where this data set that we're using to train our system actually creates a new data set that just enforces and worsens all of our biases.
So I feel like one important question is like, does our responsibility as designers extend beyond simply creating magical experiences? And that is a question that I discuss with, like, next to my consulting work, I teach a class at SVA in New York, and it's one of the important questions that I discuss with my students. And so does our responsibility as designers extend beyond simply creating magical experiences, or do we need to develop a point of view about the underlying ethics of the technologies we use and help to co-define them with engineers and others? But if we feel we do, what can we realistically do given our utilization of these increasingly complex and incomprehensible technologies? And how can we find new ways to work with the engineers that we work with? So I think one way that we can definitely do is like visualizing the potential consequences. And there's a gigantic history of critical design at the time of technological invention. So from the work of Ant Farm to House Rucker, to Dunn and Raby, who pioneered modern critical and speculative design. So what they do is like they do a great job at visually poking holes into the promises of a techno-utopian future. And specifically, this project is fantastic by James Bridle, where he trapped a self-driving car by painting one line that's continuous, that the car can go in, but it can't go out of the circle anymore. And so it's important, I feel, to visualize the potential consequences of these technologies. But own experience is better than pure knowledge and creating awareness. And I don't know if this is a German thing, but it's like as a kid, putting your tongue at the context of a 9-volt battery. It's kind of like you know it's not a good idea, but once you do it, you're certain you shouldn't do it again. But so essentially, it's like awareness through own experience, right? And so I'm very interested in how we can make these potential versions of our future more experiential and participatory. And I want to finish up with we want to finish up with a few of examples. These were examples of a project with a Spanish bank recently that explored the future implication of recommender systems. And so we got a Brooklyn-based clothing store to hand out receipts with predictions to customers, and to explore how comfortable these customers would be in receiving this predictive recommendation at their everyday touch points. Another project was for the city of New York, where we explored how a city does not only have the role to connect their citizens, but also explore the potential downsides of this connectivity. And so we started with a research phase that uncovered all these makeshift solutions, how people deal with and react to connectivity in public space. And we set up a fictitious department of foresight with a mandate to explore these cultural consequences. And so we developed concepts that an official city department may deploy. So for example, one was the silent bench, like how could companies who actually contribute to our connectivity sponsor spaces of self-reflection. Another one was a detour license that spoofs your location to a surrounding business of their choice if you don't want to be tracked at that business. And another one was a proximity jammer that jams all cell phone signals in its proximity if people speak too loud on their phones. And we tested these through a series of licensees that we tested in a workshop with the citizens of New York, how appealing they would be. It was quite interesting to see, and through the strategy of make-believe, test how appealing that would be to citizens. Another project was for Audi. We thought about new functions for cars in the context of privacy, and developed a range of key sets for cars that had dedicated functions around privacy and ethics. And then tested how these functions would look like in a series of fictitious ads. And it was interesting to anchor these future functions in a language that they know and that they can tie into and that they can understand. And one of the ideas that we unfortunately didn't get to do for obvious reasons, but it would have been nice to actually see how people on the factory floor who assemble the cars react to these devices. And one last thing I want to show is teaching, some of the experiences from the teaching at SVA. And the original class I taught was a data visualization class. And the idea was that the students installed an app called Moves, and they brought their own data to the class that they collected for 2 months prior to the class. And we got them excited about their own data, and then we flipped it that they had to observe one other person based on that data. So each student was distributed for another student. For the next week, they had to present that student as based on their data. And they had to create posters, introducing that student. For example, Sam C never runs, but once he does, he's really fast. The second one was Matt, who's a creature of habit and literally goes home, school, home, school, home, school. And it was interesting how they got so excited about presenting somebody else that they forgot that that also means that they are being presented to the class. And it was interesting if you're suddenly the subject of a presentation in an intimate setting as your class, how that makes you understand how you can also be observed by your data and misrepresented quite easily. And then it was a dashboard they had to create where each of the students had one widget above the class that visualized the whole class. So in the upper left corner, it's quite nice. They visualized the undiscovered streets of New York, so where the class hasn't been yet. And this year, we did it a little bit differently. So each student had to pick one emerging technologies they think would change our future lives the most. And they had to develop methods to make others discuss the ethical implications. And the exercises were quite nice, so some nice outcomes. One was what would happen if DNA analyzing technologies would become commonplace in our homes. So for example, like a compulsive dater who goes on a lot of dates and sneaks a chewing gum to see how the child predictions would be for that date. And they visualized it in the final presentation quite nicely through a test where people could say what would be, they made it experiential by doing this manual for the others. And another project was they got really interested in the Shanghai citizen scoring. So for those of you who don't know, like the Shanghai citizen score, they established like a score based on your social media data and other data that gives or denies you access to public services. And they wanted to make the class discuss what that would mean, which is like obviously wide-ranging implications. So they did a quick experiment where they defined 5 desirable criteria within the class, and the class scored each other for, I think, about a week. So throughout the experiment, the students rated each other, and then certain areas of the classroom were marked off for lower score people and, coffee machines. But after that, it was nice, they filmed the reaction of the students, what they thought about that experiment. And I just want to play a few snippets of that.
I don't think it's fair. I'm happy that I've benefited from it, but I don't think it's fair.
I feel very sad, and I want to get a point. I want to try to help someone to get more point and come back again to this table.
Because it's just rules made by people. I don't feel like it's fair or not. Like, you just give me this system and then you tell me what to do. This is the rule. If you do that, you change your score. And it's all about the score. It's all about the system that people made up. I don't feel it's more fair, to be honest.
So, and I feel like one thing that I really enjoy with the class and also the experiment that we just did today is a little bit this, I feel sometimes, specifically in the context of ethics, we expect people to care too much. Like, how can you not care about ethics? But I feel it's also our job as designers to open them up for these topics. And like with a class, for example, or with the experiment, like where we start by engaging people by creating excitement and providing like a positive experience first and an engaging experience rather than, what is it called, like hitting them on the head?
With a hammer.
Yeah, like with a hammer or something. Yeah. But I think it's interesting, like those methods of creating curiosity and engagement, and then basically once they open to it, telling them what the problems with that could be, essentially. But to make a long story short, in this work, we're interested in developing new methods that challenge our existing assumptions and break up our patterns of thought. And so I feel this combination, like how can we make our potential futures not only visual, but also experiential? And how can we learn from that experience and translate it into new strategies? And I think specifically new technologies, we need new methods to understand the technologies better we work with. And as I said like earlier, like I think one of our big questions is like, what is our role and responsibility as designers working with these technologies? And so, especially in a time in like reality is catching up with fiction. So there was this Black Mirror episode a couple of years ago that is like eerily resembling what's happening in Shanghai with the citizen score right now, right? And so yesterday's fictions become tomorrow's reality in a way. But in the next years, we will be confronted with like a bunch of eerily and scaring technologies like AI, who transfer horse into a zebra, the face-to-face where, you know, we speak through another person's video. But to end on an optimistic note, I still like magic, and I think our future experiences should be partially magic. But I think we have to be a little bit careful that we don't become too fascinated by the bells and whistles of our magic, that we don't forget to question the inner workings. And similar to magic, where there's no way to understand how the magic trick works because the magic book is secret, that we don't just lean back and enjoy being amazed and surprised. So again, like if we are the ones who interface these technology to the user, making them as magic as we can, do we have to care about their underlying ethics? I'm sure we should, but we need new methods to enable better discussions around their future implications. Thank you.